Welcome back everyone for another installment of the Loganbuilt 4748 DIY kit series. Today we are going to completely build out the case. So first thing we need to do before we can build out the case is we need to install the Overdrive piston support. Now before we go and install the Overdrive piston support, I like to take that red Scotch-Brite pad once again and run around the outer edges of where the sealing ring is going to be. And then same on the inside here, make sure I have a nice clean smooth surface. When I'm doing that, I'm looking for any major gouging or deep scratches that could possibly cut a lip seal. If you have anything like that, it's important to replace this Overdrive piston support. And then same on the side where the low drum is going to ride, I like to take a scuff pad to that, clean it up really good. This isn't nearly as crucial, but I just like for it to be a nice smooth surface so it gets good and lubed. There's no no bearing of any sort in between here, so the only thing that keeps this from not getting into the steel low drum is just the lubrication. So I like to make sure there's no deep scratches or anything tore up there. And then always make sure that your surfaces for your gasket is nice and clean as well. One other thing that's very important on an Overdrive piston support is this little orifice right here. This plastic plug with the screen in it. If this gets blown out, somehow gets knocked out, it's very rare. I've only ever had this happen to me one time. But if this is missing, what will happen is the check ball behind it won't seal because there won't be a check ball. And so this small orifice here will flood the Overdrive piston with oil. This will apply the Overdrive piston all the time, and it'll burn up the Overdrive clutches almost immediately. So it's very important to make sure that that little orifice plug with the screen is there and that the screen is not plugged up in it. So now the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go to your seal kit and you're going to find the gasket that looks like this. If you lay it over here, you can see how it's all orientated and all of the holes line up. And then take this over to the case, and essentially it will go on the case just like that, and just make sure that all of your holes line up on the case as well. So once you have that properly where it goes, now you can take your piston support, you could put it down in there, and you can line that up. So now the next thing that we need to do is we need to take our 6 3/8 bolts and make sure those are clean, and then run those in. Okay, so once we've got those ran in, your Overdrive piston support is going to look like that. So now we need to torque all of these 3/8 bolts. I like to torque these to 100 inch-pounds. We're getting into the part of the transmission where really you should have an inch-pound torque wrench. If you have a just foot-pound torque wrench, you can convert it, but when we start getting, into like the 100 inch-pounds and less, I feel like the foot-pound torque wrenches aren't as quite as accurate as what I would personally like them to be. So we're going to set this at 100 inch-pounds, and then just like the wheels on your car, just like the wheels on your car, I like to go through and torque these in a star pattern. And then once I've ran around them in the star pattern a couple times, then I just like to go across one more time and just make sure that they're all good. Okay, now we've got our 3/8 bolts torqued up. Now we're ready to start assembling this thing. So, easiest way to do this is to set this on top of a bucket, so that way everything can go together nice and easy. And once again, one of those things where you don't have to buy a fancy fixture or build anything. A normal plastic 5-gallon bucket will do you just fine. So once you've got your case set up on the bucket here, you want to make sure that the sealing surface of the pump is good and clean. Run your finger on it, make sure that there's no sharp edges or anything that stands out to you that could be a problem, especially down here in the area where all of the forward, the direct, and the converter, all that apply and release is. As long as that's in good shape, then you're ready to start building the case. Before you put the Sprag in, one thing you want to check is you want to make sure that the race in the Sprag is not loose. Somebody did a bolt-in Sprag in this at some point in its life, so that's really good. For any of the DIY kits, that is absolutely not necessary. But you do want to make sure that the metal race of the Sprag is good and tight in the case, because if it's loose, it's only going to continue to get worse. And say if you were stuck in the mud and you were in reverse and the wheels were spinning and you dropped it into drive with the wheels spinning, or vice versa, it could at that point roll the Sprag right out of the case. So that is important to note. Assuming that your case is good to go, now it's time to put the low reverse Sprag in it. So this is only going to go in one way. The rollers of this are going to be basically climbing the little ramp that's in it. It'll go in and it'll feel, you know, right. If you're fighting with it at all, you might have it going in upside down. And then once you have the Sprag in, you want to take your low reverse band, which just like the clutches, you've soaked this for at least 30 minutes. And you can see that there's a 2-tab and then 1-tab. The 2-tab is going to go up against the area where the pin is over here. So you want to make sure that the single tab is what the actual servo lever is going to be pushing on. So you want to put it in like this. It will go in either way, and if you have it backwards, when you get to put the servo in, when you get to that point, you'll realize that it's backwards, and you have to take all this back out and do it all over again. Now at this point, this is when I like to start using some ATF during assembly. Shout out to Extreme Brand Products. I'm a stocking dealer for them. I think that they have really good oil. It's best bang for your buck. So I just pour a little bit down into the Sprag area. And that's also why I put this on a bucket, is so it catches all the fluid. And then I'll actually put this on the same bucket that I soak my clutches and steels in, so that way I'm not wasting this fluid. But you don't need to put a lot in it. Really, I put too much in it, but you can't hurt it by putting too much in. So now the low reverse drum goes in. No rhyme or reason to this. It can only go in one way. Like everything else we've talked about, take a scuff pad to it, give it a nice clean surface area. Make sure it's clean, there's no fuzz in it. And then you'll center this up in the piston support, and then you'll turn it clockwise, and it'll go right in. That helps it go into the rollers easier. And then now you'll go back to your thrust washer kit, and you'll get this bronze looking thrust washer. And I like to run these instead of the plastic ones. On a truck that's not seeing, you know, much abuse, it doesn't tow very often or anything like that, or even a race truck that's not getting hot a lot, the plastic washer is more than fine. But on this one, it just gives it a little added protection from the heat. And then you're going to want to install this with the bronze side facing down. So that way the drum, as it wants to move up and down, it has the bearing surface here to ride on. And that only goes on one way. There's 2 tabs that hold it in. And then you're going to use this snap ring to retain it. This snap ring looks very similar to the low reverse snap ring, but as you can see, it has sharp angled edges, and so that's how you know that this one is for the low reverse drum. To put it in, you just take your snap ring pliers and spread it, and then it'll pop right in the snap ring groove in the overdrive piston. Alright, so once I install that, I usually just spin the drum around, make sure that it's spinning freely, nothing's, you know, I'm not having to forcefully spin it, and that one feels really good. I'll usually take just a little bit more transmission fluid, pour it around the outside of it like that, give it one more spin, really for no reason other than it's just my habit of doing so. And now we're ready to put the 1-2 Planetary assembly inside. No special tips or tricks on this. This just slides in. You usually just grab the front Planetary with your hand, help get it in. And then once you set it down in here, you can rotate it until it falls in like that. Now you know the lugs are engaged in the low reverse drum, and you can turn it, and everything's gravy. Now, at this point, if you remember this little spacer here that I said don't lose, this needs to go on top of the intermediate shaft like that. It's really important that you don't forget that. If you forget that, your in play will be way wrong and you'll have forward clutch issues. So once again, I pour a little ATF on my gear set here. I just like to have everything lubed up. I don't really like for the first startup or the first drive or anything to be dry. Now we're ready to put our completed input, forward clutch hub, and direct drum assembly in. But remember that that 3-tab washer needs to stay in there. If that 3-tab washer is falling out on you, make sure you put it back in. And then this can be a little bit tricky because not only are you trying to line up the lugs on the direct drum to the sun shell, but you're also trying to spline the forward clutches to the front gear, and you're trying to keep the direct clutches splined up. So this takes a little bit of finesse. And once you get it down on there a little bit, the easiest thing to do is to get the forward drum down in there, get all of the forward clutches splined up first. So you just spin it until you do that. Now sometimes you got to pick up on it a little bit and spin it and shake it. Okay, so now I can tell the forward clutches are splined all the way up. And now we can spin it to the lugs over here. And then sometimes you got to shake it a little bit. Sometimes you got to pick it up and repeat the process. Okay, so that is all the way down in there. You will know it's all the way down in there because see if I can show you this without flipping it off the bucket. The lugs will be engaged into the sun shell. Now notice that the lugs do not go all the way to the bottom of the sun shell engagement, and that's okay. As long as they're flush with the top, it's fully engaged. Now at this point, we need to install our second gear band. The bands that you're going to get with your kit is not side specific. Some of the bands that are out there can only go on one way, but my stuff, I like to use this Rabestis band, and they're not side specific. So essentially, you're just going to set this down in here with the 2 lugs being able to be exposed from the valve body area. And then to get it in, you'll have to bring it over here like this on one end, drop it down past, and then spin it, and then boom. And then it just needs to sit right there for the time being. So once it's in and it's past the little bump in the case here and the boss over here, you're good to go. So now the next thing we need to do is go over to our seal kit and get our front pump seal. So this is what your pump seal, or gasket I should say, is going to look like. It is side specific. It only goes on one way. Very simple. Just line up all of the holes. And as long as all of your holes line up, then you know you have it right. So now, at this point, we're ready to put the pump in. But before we put the pump in, back to what I was saying before about plugging these holes with the right stuff. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Alright, so we've got the right stuff smeared over our holes there. I kind of like to, keep it nice and smooth. Don't use too much excess. And then we're ready to put the pump down in here. Now, one thing I like to do again is I like to run a little bit of oil over the input shaft and around the edge of the direct drum here. And that's just so that way the seals on the input shaft and the seals on the pump are going together with lubrication. And then this only goes in one way, the way the bolt holes are drilled. So just line everything up. The breather is obviously going to be up here at the top of the case. and then nicely put it all in. And you want to make sure you don't force this, because those pump seals, like what just clicked in right there, if you get one of those hung up or you get it a little off, it'll break those seals. So you want to make sure you've got it as close to lined up on the bolts as possible. And then I give it a little push, and then that thing is seated down in here. Now, one thing I'll check before I even start putting the bolts in is I'll rock my input, and I know that if I can rock the input around, everything is splined up nicely, and I haven't hurt any of the pump sealing rings. So now we're going to get our pump bolts cleaned up. We're going to get the old sealing washers off of them, which can be difficult from time to time. Sometimes you have to pop them loose with either a pick or a razor knife, and then put a pair of pliers on them and then run them out with impact, just because the factory sealing ring seals a lot tighter to the actual thread of the bolt itself. Luckily on these, somebody has replaced them with the standard aftermarket ones, so they came apart pretty quickly. So you're going to go to your kit and you're going to look for these seals right here, and these are your pump bolt seals. So you want to take these out, be very careful not to lose any of them. And you can see that, in my opinion, they are side specific. One side is tapered, it's a nice bubbly look, and then the other side is completely flat. I always put the tapered side, or the stamp side, whatever you want to call it, down onto the pump, to the sealing surface. So I'm going to install it in the bolt like so. So now the bubbly side is facing up, so when it goes in, that's how it'll be. And then you just do these one at a time and then run them in. So now once I've got them all in, started by hand, I'll take a 1/2-inch socket just on a normal ratchet, and I'll run them down close. Alright, so now that I've got them all down close, now we're going to get out our foot-pound torque wrench again. And I like to torque these at 16 foot-pounds. 15 foot-pounds is what OEM calls for, but I like to go just a fuzz tighter. And then I'm going to go in the same star pattern. When you're using a torque wrench, you really want to go nice and slow with it. I see guys jump at stuff and try to twist it on there really tight, and you're, really quickly, and you're not getting an accurate torque measurement that way. And then just like last time, once I get them all done, I'll run around the outside and just make sure that they're all good. Alright, so now our main case has all of the major important components assembled. So now we can throw it up on the table here and start working on our servos.